So I was going to start by asking about people's mindfulness experience, but since I know the answer, I don't need to. I've just pushed the OK button for the recording. So, yeah, so you probably both know my start point was half my life ago. In '89, when I went to INSEAD Business School in Fontainebleau for 2 months. And you couldn't, or not many people could, wine and dine in that wonderful French town for 8 weeks without doing something else. And there were a number of activities, one of which was yoga I'd never done before. And I think fair to say I got hooked. It probably helped. It was a fantastic young Indian lady teacher with the right atmosphere and the full bit with incense. And so it was a full immersion. And I've pretty much been hooked ever since, to the extent I've just finished teaching a yoga class, and I've had 2 meetings today about doing mindfulness work with other organizations. So one of the joys for me of all of this is that my interest, which began 35 years ago as an interest, has now become a sizable part of my day job. Not only for me, but for lots of other people in leadership roles and positions, or people in senior roles who have a responsibility for workplace well-being. We're now well into a phase where what we're talking about today is normal, or at least normal for many people and many leaders in organizations. So that's, I think, the first thing where we're not, yes, with some people, of course, we're starting from scratch or near scratch, but with lots of people, there is at least an awareness of what we're up to when we start to talk about mindfulness and mindful leadership. So I had a look at, and I reminded myself for this event of what are the qualities, skills, behaviors that are needed by a person in a leadership role, regardless of the organization, public or private sector, big or small. And it doesn't matter where you look these days. I think anything modern, anything in the last few years includes the words authentic, empathic, open, honest, trustworthy. And when I looked at some of the sources I've got, these are recurring themes for leaders. I asked my AI chat bot, which came up with making employees feel comfortable by communicating openly and honestly. We all know this, but we're probably still all aware, or maybe even occasionally subject to behaviors that are not of those standard or quality. But what our mindfulness training does is make it more likely that we will exhibit, enhance, and develop those leadership capabilities, the ones that people think are appropriate for today, and the ones that make us a good leader. So where I thought I would start, because you are experienced practitioners, is with one of the basic, most simple, short practices that we can do, which is working with the breath. The joy of this practice is we'll do a few minutes now. It's suitable for a minute or two. It's suitable for maybe 7-8 minutes we'll do now. And it's suitable, if you feel like it, for a much longer practice. So in my usual teaching style, if it's okay with you, we'll just settle and do about 8 minutes worth. I'm not going to time it, but that's my guess of what we will do in this first practice. So there are many ways to be instructed about how to sit, but I think the two elements that recur to me most often are straighten the spine, not too tense, not too relaxed. So that midpoint where you're aware of your spine being straight and the shoulders relaxed. And I don't mind whether you have your eyes open or closed. If they're open, see if they can be in a kind of neutral space rather than watching what people are doing on the screen. So maybe just below the screen or lightly closed. I encourage people to allow time to bring your awareness inwards into your own internal environment. That gives you the freedom to become aware of body as a whole, body in its entirety, or body parts that become more prominent in your mind, feet, hands, spine, shoulders, doesn't matter. Somewhere in the physical body. And for experienced practitioners, you may already have gone to awareness of breathing. If you need something to keep the mind occupied and on the job, we can say, I am breathing in, I am breathing out. And kind of coordinate those words with the rhythm of your breath, if that works. Some people like to abbreviate that to breathing in, breathing out. Or just in, out. If the mind wanders, as it's likely to do for all of us, then we can escort it gently back to the breath. Some people like to just drop the naming and come back to breath. Others prefer to use the words or phrases. Just to help us stay present and internal. We'll just have a few more breaths, and when you're ready to bring your practice to a close, you can decide you're going to finish with 3 conscious breaths at your own leisure. So how was it?
For me, it was very settling, grounding. Thank you.
I think I needed that, Alan.
And I love that word, Mark, settling. I've been listening to a very long series of talks by Alan Wallace, and he uses that in his Let's Settle. Before we do anything else, before we do any clever training of the mind with this technique or that, settling, you won't do it if you don't settle first. And so that's quite nice. So you've had a busy day, Stuart, and end of week in sight.
Yeah. I think what I notice is the when my mind wanders, I tend to I look at the touch of the hands that I've got. So I sort of like, as it's running away from us, the touch, and then I bring it back.
Okay.
In the elbows, but I've found it very difficult to get back into the swing of things since Christmas. And it's not a great time of year. I'm not a great fan of this time of year. And that's the most settled I've been for a couple of days. That's good.
Okay. Well, I get to have a knees up in the middle of January because I have a birthday. So we had a very nice dinner out on Wednesday night because that was my birthday.
Oh.
So that kind of perks me up mid-January, but I completely get what you're saying. For most people, it's a tough old grind out of New Year into getting January off the ground. So I'm a bit of a quotations fiend, and one that I like, and you might have heard me use this before, but this is Bill George, who's now at Harvard, but was a very successful CEO in the US, and I think probably stopped at 50s, maybe 60ish, and is now a professor at Harvard focusing on mindful leadership. And he says the main case for mindfulness is that if you're fully present, you will be more effective as a leader. So that's a bit of a no-brainer, but research tells us that we are not fully present. Even when we're trying to be fully present, you will have been in many meetings where the level of presence, even amongst senior people, varies from the fully engrossed, fully present, fully engaged to the exact opposite, which drives us all mad if we see people on devices or chatting amongst themselves and all of these distracted behaviors. And a piece of research by Microsoft 3-4 years ago suggests that mind wandering happens roughly 50% of the time. So your mind might wander, you might spot it and bring it back like we did in the practice, or your mind might wander down some other path because what's in front of us is deadly dull and boring and uninteresting, and we think we're better heading off somewhere else. The truth of the matter is we are all mindful and we are all mindless. And it's about what is the ratio at any given point in our day, week, or life. And if we're mindless at the wrong time, like, how was your day, dear? And then we're not mindful of what the answer or answers might be, then we know that that can have a hazardous effect. And it's exactly the same at work. So the case for mindfulness training, and in particular for leaders, is pretty strong. And there are many good examples. I dug out in the Sunday Times, they have a weekly feature on a leader of some sort, and increasingly you will see the mention of some mindful technique or behavior, or having to get away to have quality time to oneself, and including a meditation practice in that. So we're in a more mindful era, but there's a lot of work to be done, not just for those of us who are already committed, but to bring on board those who as yet haven't necessarily engaged as much as they could. I think one of the elements that is less well known or less well popularized for the case for mindfulness is how much it can help strategic thinking or problem solving for those who have that responsibility in their leadership role. And I'm very taken with the work of Danny Penman at Oxford University, who's written a book called Mindfulness for Creativity. And you only have to go back 2,000 years to when Marcus Tullius Cicero said, "Only the man who can relax can create." And for him, ideas come like lightning. So it's not a new phenomenon to know that relaxed, calm, mindful headspace leads to potentially better quality creative thinking or problem solving. And I think we're learning more and more all the time about how we can benefit from our practice. But this is one that I think for leaders in particular, charged with strategy, charged with a changing landscape around them, whatever business environment they are in, to be able to choose to come away from that, either to think strategically or to handle problem issues as they arise, and not go rushing around thinking, oh my God, what we're going to do here. That's where we really, I think, start to see some massive benefits for those of us who do have a meditative practice. I also dug out my own coach is called Michael Carroll, author of a book called The Mindful Leader. And he has a list of talents of mindful leaders. And the top two, I think, are very pertinent to what we're talking about today. Number one, simplicity. Don't overcomplicate your life, never mind your diary, your open folders on your computer, all of those things that we can make our roles too complex with. Just simplifying. And if there, I don't know a better technique than something like we've just done that simplifies down to its core how to bring a sense of calm and peace to us. And the second quality that Michael talks about is poise. So that wherever we are in an organization, whether we're talking to internal or external stakeholders, we always look and sound and maybe feel that we are on our game, that we are calm, that we're in charge, that we are with it, empathic, and so on. And these are leadership qualities that we all kind of know, but sometimes we don't exhibit. So the issue that you will come up against, and I do often from time to time, is the busyness that people are faced with. And I get it. Everyone's to-do list is longer than their ability to finish it, unless you have a very fortunate job where you can put your feet up on the desk and read your book for an hour or two. But I don't think there's many of those jobs around these days. And people are too busy to find a few minutes for a meditation or mindfulness practice. And yet, research suggests that 10 minutes is a good enough stint if you can set that time aside. And 10 minutes is 1% of your waking hours. Mm. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that I waste more than 1% of my waking hours doom scrolling, LinkedIn, TV, bits of snippets here and there online. And whilst I don't think I'm an overuser of those things. I could be if I didn't decide, do you know what, I need to go and find some mindful time and space in which to do something that's enhancing my skills and not just filling in time. So I don't think I buy really the I haven't got time unless somebody is every waking minute filling it with valuable leadership behaviors and capabilities.
Is that a function of fear?
Is that
a function of fear?
I think it's a function of fear of what you might find out if you start to explore and try to understand a bit more about what your mind is up to or might be up to. I think that's absolutely spot on. And you do meet people, you and I and Mark will have met plenty of people who, oh, I've tried that. It didn't work for me. Well, what is it that didn't work? What was it you did that didn't work for you? Like, did you have one piano lesson and decide, I'm not ever going to be able to play the piano? Or open a textbook at school or university and say, oh, I don't fancy this, and toss it to one side after a couple of interventions. You know, I don't know whose quotation this is. I did know the other day, but I couldn't find the source. But if you want to learn about something, you must study it. And frankly, what could be more interesting than studying our own mind and understanding it, and then being able to have some element of influence or possibly even control over what our mind gets up to. So again, I don't buy that I've tried that and it didn't work for me, especially if you listened to something online or went to somewhere where there was a short expose. That's no good. If you're really serious, then you've got to find a period of time in which you devote and dedicate enough time. And we're talking about, 10 minutes a day for a few weeks. And then you will start, Stuart, to not only understand what might be fearful, but what's its characteristics? Is it repetitious? Is it when I go to the XYZ meeting every week or every month? Is there a pattern here? Or is it something like I spoke to a coaching client the other day that comes from a very bad personal experience, in her case, a divorce from a few years back, that's still having hangovers into and affecting her work from time to time. So when we can understand what's going on, then there is more chance that we will have some influence and control over our own mind. Who would not like a bit more of that? And actually, this is seamless. That leads me to the second practice I thought we would do, which is a little bit longer than the first one. We might do 10 to 12 minutes. Again, I'm not going to set the timer on it. And we will settle like we did first time round. And then I'm just going to encourage you to become a little more aware of what's happening and maybe be able to explore it gently in the few minutes we've got. So if it's okay with you, let's settle. Straighten the spine, relax the shoulders. Make yourself feel as if you're comfortable and balanced, and you don't have to move too much. We don't want a totally rigid body, but we want to think that we can be still physically, and that will enable us to have a chance of stilling, quietening, calming the mind for maybe about 10 minutes. Important to stress, this is not emptying the mind. That is an impossibility. But allowing a little Friday afternoon calm to settle is a possibility. I've heard it described, meditation puts a spam filter in your head. We can let go of thinking and bring our attention, our awareness into our own internal environment. Body and breath, to your own measure, to your own practice at this moment. allowing plenty time for the settling of body, breath, and mind to happen. It's not always smooth or linear. It may be that there are moments of calm and peace and other moments of minor busyness, agitation, mental activity, all fine. Not trying to change any of it. Becoming aware or more aware of how our own mind is at this present moment. Friday afternoon, 4:30. So there are analogies you'll be familiar with of sitting perhaps on a riverbank as the river flows gently by. Sometimes it feels as if that river is very quiet and gentle and not much happening. Sometimes there may be a bit more movement, maybe logs and debris floating by gently, or sometimes even a bit more agitated. And this is an analogy that's often used for the mind. Sometimes gentle and quiet, sometimes a bit more chunky, clunky, agitated. But whatever it is, it will pass. And as we settle into this practice, it may be that there is an occasional thought arises that we don't allow to pass as if it were a log in the river. It may be that there's just the odd one, just the occasional thought that we want to consciously engage with, and just ask, what is it? Where does it come from? Is it new? Is it repetitive? Does it have any other characteristics of note? And then you can let it pass. We're not going looking for thoughts. We're on the riverbank. We're watching them come and go. Just perhaps the odd one is worthy of a little engagement and exploration, curiosity. It's possible it might even disappear down the river before you've had enough of a chance to explore. And if that doesn't happen, then we can just dangle our feet on the river edge and watch thoughts glide gently past. It may or may not happen today. You may run this practice for weeks on end without any insight, but every now and then we learn something about our own mind, our thinking patterns, our habits. That is just providing more understanding, more insight into our own mind. We can't force that to happen. It can only happen through sitting on that riverbank, watching the thoughts and probing gently from time to time for a little insight. This is the work, training, the understanding, the practice. And as we did first time round, I encourage you at some point soon to finish your practice with 3 conscious breaths. So you've just consumed about 1% of your waking hours in that practice, and whether you think that was a valuable use of them or not. I don't have much more to say. There is so much research, information, fascinating content to be had around this whole subject of mindful leadership. My final quotation is from the late, great Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, "I meditate for 30 minutes every morning, except on a super busy day, I meditate for an hour." So I'm happy to hear your feedback, take any questions.
I'll go first, if that's all right, sure. First feedback, I know you said that one was about 10 minutes. The first one was about 6. That one seemed shorter, strangely. But but my mind also seemed busier. So, but that's partly, yeah, what I noticed was I am a bit tired, but I'm also just before the call got some news for some funding that we'd applied for, which we've been successful for. So
Ah,
I feel as though a lot of weight has been taken off my shoulders. So
great.
that's left me feeling maybe a little bit more tired. It's a Friday afternoon as well, mine, but yeah,
Ah,
a bit
yeah.
tired. But also happy. When you were talking about the time and stuff, and you talked earlier about how you see in the Times there's lots of people talking about meditation, mindfulness, and stuff, and how it's more commonplace. It's becoming increasingly more commonplace. My experience of working in businesses and trying to get businesses to take on mindfulness is that and it's maybe I'm moving in slightly different circles, is that a lot of workplaces that they don't see the benefit of mindfulness. So and actually there was a Guardian article which I saw on LinkedIn earlier today, which talked about how mindfulness and well-being interventions at work don't actually help that much. And the response from the mindfulness initiative was it needs to come from the top. It needs it's
Yeah.
when it's mindful leadership, when there's a mindfulness culture, then it can work. But unless that happens, then
Yes,
yeah,
I agree.
if it's just
Totally agree.
here's an app and listen, do some meditation on your lunch break, then that's not gonna help
No,
anyone.
no.
So it's getting that. I suppose the question is how. I suppose two questions. One, how do leaders get the message across to their staff, to their workforce, that this is of benefit to them?
Mhm.
But two, how do we get that message across to senior managers in leadership positions who maybe aren't using meditation or mindfulness and therefore maybe aren't as authentic as they could be?
Yeah, great questions. One of the calls I had today, which is to go into a business, I said I'm only coming in if I can meet the boss before we do anything, and then I want him to come to the session. So otherwise, we're not doing it. And that's quite a sizable, sort of maybe 300-person business. But also, I think there are times, Mark, where if the boss is either not engaged or even potentially slightly anti, we just need to walk away, find somebody else.
Yeah, fair enough.
Stu, how about you?
Well, I think you've sort of forced us into a situation today, which is wonderful. You've nicely forced us, Alan, because I capture moments throughout the day. So I feel I need to be grounded a lot. So I'll go for a pinch point grounding, so a couple of breaths on my feet on the floor, and I've tried and that sort of works for me. But what you've done is allow me, and there's a little bit of group thing going on. You know, when you're in a group, you've pushed us through maybe a 4 or 5 minute barrier that I wouldn't have normally went through.
Okay.
There's a resistance, and all of a sudden it's flow.
Mm-hmm.
And I thank you for that, because I don't do that very often. I do listen to people talking, but so that's what I found for that. I think it's pushing the boundary of resistance to get that flow,
Yes.
which comes from the practice. I think that's my first point.
I think that, that's very perceptive, because it's exactly the point we were talking about earlier. Finding the time, first of all, and then pushing it along a little bit is where you start to get the understanding, the insight occasionally. I'm not saying that's a magic wand thing. And then actually, I'm looking forward to doing my practice, not having it as a thing that I might squeeze in here and there. And that will, I'm 35 years in, and I'm hoping a few more years of developing, growing, expanding the practice, because wherever we are on this journey, we're still only, this amount of understanding about our own minds. And as Alan Wallace was saying in this series I've just been listening to, we know more and more and more and more about the human brain, and we know still the same amount about the mind as the yogis did 500 or 1,000 years ago. And there's a bit of a gap there somewhere.
So
that's probably a reasonable note on which to sign the week off and go and have a refreshment of your choice, a cup of tea or a glass of lemonade or something of that sort.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan. Actually, before we do go and have our beverage of choice, etc., just around that busyness thing, because you said about squeezing the time in and finding the time. How do we get the message across that if it's all about finding time, trying to squeeze time, and it feels like a chore, and
yes,
you're not going to find the time. You have to make the time, and we make the time for physical health. We make the time for hygiene. We make the time for nutrition. How do we get the message across that we need to make the time for the mind?
It's a good question. I think it in a leadership role, it is part of your CPD. You'll be doing lots of things that are growth and development and skills and so on. So just add it to your CPD repertoire, and it's much more fun than some of the other alternatives, which is studying stuff in textbooks and upskilling or reskilling. It's got to just be part of one's personal growth and development plan. And then if people incorporate it in that way, it's not the case that we're fitting it in here and there wherever we can.
Well, thank you, Alan. And thank you, Stuart, for coming, and thank you for your kind donation as well. The next Friday lecture, third Friday of every month, is a guy called Simon Rinn, who's an Australian. It'll be a recorded session because time zones make it complicated. But Simon runs a podcast called Mindful Men in Australia, which is all about supporting men's mental health through mindfulness online. So hopefully both of you can make that as well.
We'll certainly help you publicize it on LinkedIn, Mark.
Yeah. Link in with us, Mark.
Yeah, we'll do, Stuart. Definitely.
I'm always happy to help, because I'll finish with one thing, and that is a leader will only buy into this if it's helped them through their own crisis.
Yeah.
So it's whether or not most leaders have crises, and they tend to relieve it with alcohol.
Yeah.
So once they've given up on alcohol, you can still have it, but once you've realised that there's more ways than alcohol to treat your stresses and strains, then you're a convert.
Great. Thanks, Stu. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
All the best. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye now. Thank you so much, Alan.
Okay, Mark.
Stop the recording.